All right, for more perspective on the Ukraine-Russia gas talks, we're joined by Kent Moores. He's the editor of the Oil and Energy newsletter. Kent, thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Michelle.
Kent, as Jack Barton just reported, Ukraine and Russia failing to get a decisive breakthrough in their standoff over gas supplies to Kiev. They will resume the European Union-sponsored talks supposedly next week. Does this stalemate surprise you?
Not particularly. There are a number of elements that we always knew were going to be in the mix at about the 11th hour. And the one that was thrown in this afternoon, quite predictably from the Russian energy minister, Alexander Novak, was they want some guarantee, the Russians do, that Ukraine actually will be able to pay for the consignments to be delivered through next March. They want to know the details of the sources of that money. And most people assume that this is going to require some EU funding, either directly or through the back door, to make that happen. But we now have until October 29th, which is the next time the parties meet, to work out those details.
Well, Kent, on that $2 billion line of credit that Ukraine is expecting to get from the EU to pay for this, why would the EU not follow through on this? It is in their interest as well that this whole issue is resolved.
Absolutely, Michelle. But you must remember that if the entire package is now up for discussion, we're not dealing with $2 billion. We're not dealing with $3.1 billion. We're dealing with upwards to $7 billion, both the cost of the consignments through next March and the amount that Ukraine is already in arrears. And that is the real sticking point.
On the upside, the European Energy Commissioner reported that the three parties did agree on the price Ukraine would pay Russia's Gazprom, and that's $385 per 1,000 cubic meters, as long as you mentioned it paid in advance for these deliveries. If the price is agreed, are the major sticking points then resolved?
Not really, although we must remember a couple of things about the price. The most important being that's about $100 per 1,000 cubic meters below what it is that Western Europe is already paying for Russian gas. So there may be some political murmurings in and around Brussels because of this deal that's being brokered. Agreeing to the price is clearly the bottom line consideration, but it is the certainty that the Ukrainians will be able to pay both for this and for the arrearage that is now the sticking point as far as Moscow is concerned.
As far as Moscow is concerned, does the fact that Russia is at the negotiating table and making some concessions indicate that the EU and US sanctions are, in fact, working?
I think, Michelle, you're quite correct there. The sanctions themselves are having an impact. We're now in a situation where the ruble is at the lowest exchange level in its history, where Russia is still dependent for upwards to 60% of its central budget on the exporting of oil and gas. Now, oil has been going down in price. Gas has been sustaining, but in order for Gazprom to be able to deliver for the Russian central budget, Gazprom must be exporting more natural gas than it does today, not simply the same amount. So by brokering this agreement, the EU is guaranteeing their consignments, but Moscow really needs more natural gas to be exported, or they're going to have some central budget difficulties moving forward.
Definitely a lot of volatility in natural gas prices since September, and that's weighing in on Russia. So, Kent, if no deal is reached, or if it takes even longer to reach a deal, who has the most to lose?
I think both sides have the most to lose. The Russian credibility will be going down, and we'll begin to see the sanctions having an even greater impact. On the Ukrainian side, it's going to get cold very quickly, and you must remember now, for at least 3 months, they've already turned the heat and the hot water off in Kiev. Well, winter is now setting in there, and the natural gas is absolutely essential. There is no other short-term source for that gas other than Russia.
In the meantime, the European Union states are fearing that their own supplies could be disrupted if this issue is not resolved, and the EU relies on Russia for about a third of its natural gas supplies. They're also meeting next week to discuss gaining some independence from Russia. What are their options?
Actually, since the last time we've had a gas crisis, that was in January of 2009 in a bitter cold spell where the gas was cut off that was moving across Ukraine. Since that point, Europe actually has diversified its sources. The real key here is kicking in a little over a year, when liquefied natural gas consignments will begin arriving from the United States, and those deliveries will be escalating. Europe now has sufficient LNG terminal capacity to be able to expand the LNG component of its overall natural gas structure. But for the next year or so, that simply isn't going to be there. It's simply, it's going to be there in the long term, but not now.
All right, we're going to be following that. We're going to have to leave it there for now, though. Thank you so much, Kent Moores, editor of the Oil and Energy newsletter. And of course, those talks resuming between Ukraine and Russia, brokered by the EU next week.